We celebrate 30 years as an independent, self-supporting church. But all of this got started more than 30 years ago in the Newburgh Town Hall. So founding pastor Robert Helms and I returned there. It's now a museum, but the director was kind enough to show us around and allow us to shoot this video looking back on how it all got started.
This old building seemed like the ideal place for us. The first time I approached him about possibly renting it, I was denied. The Lord just worked. I don't have time, you wouldn't have time for me to speak about how He led and answered prayer. And when it looked like that there was just no way we were going to find a meeting place, that's when Mark was the man that God worked through here. So it's a precious memory, indeed, precious memory. And so on Saturday night, unless the weather was bad, we'd walk up here. Maybe some of my family would come with me. We'd come up and we'd gather up all the ashtrays and cigarette butts, and we'd sweep the floors and have it all, and get the songbooks out. The board allowed us to have a sign, a sign that you see both sides of it. I'm not sure how you call that sign, and we could set it out on the front walk, and drivers by could see that sign. My memory takes me back. It was in the north end of this section, is where the town board all met with the microphones all up front, and they all sat on an elevated platform and took care of town business. And so that's what we made my pulpit up there. We used that for my pulpit. Over in the northwest corner, there was a little offset there, and we were permitted to set a piano back in there. And there were church pews. They still use the old church pews then for the town board meetings. They lined east and west. When I came here, when I was in Illinois, I had a burden for Christian education, strong burden for Christian education. And so even though we were just a mission, and I didn't have a way of having a school, I had a relationship with a man in Tennessee who was a Christian school principal, church school principal. And I invited him to come up, and he's a preacher, young preacher. He came up and he preached, and I asked him to present to our people, the young families who were here, the need for Christian education and to champion, good church schools. The Alvises came to us, I think it was in October, and we had our first service latter part of August, and they came in October to visit us one Sunday night, and we meshed hurriedly. And I'll never forget this, that when they came, their daughter, who was the first graduate of our school, first one went through high school, graduate who was a model student. See, she was one with her mother and dad and little brother were sitting in this place when Roger Hood was here, fulfilling my request, that he tell our people, our parents, why they need to send their kids to Christian school. That's a precious thing there. But right here's where it all began. Mm-hmm. My sons weren't all that delighted about moving back here, leaving what they got new over in Illinois, as I look back on that part of it, especially my youngest son was affected mostly by it. He was playing basketball and was very athletic, and that was right in the middle of basketball season when he came here, and I didn't realize it then how much it affected him, and that and some other things, kind of created some rebellion there. But today, I talk about it, Daniel. The Lord had been so faithful. I knew they didn't understand, and had I to do it over, I'd probably waited until summer to come, But I didn't realize it. But God's faithfulness is demonstrated in a real strong way. I could talk all morning about things I recall that we did here. Some folks who were saved and then later baptized, and some who were here and they've already gone on to their reward. we understood when we came that it'd be just a short term. We didn't plan to stay long, and that was agreed. That's what I wanted. That's what they wanted. And I don't know how I learned about it now, but I learned about an old community house over on Plank Road that was pretty well abandoned. It was abandoned. I'm sorry, it wasn't pretty well. In fact, the roof leaked and it wasn't even complete on the inside. And I thought about that, and it seemed like just the ideal thing for us to consider. I brought it to the men and asked the men of the mission if they would be willing to help. We'd go in, put more drywall on that thing and find some pews somewhere. When we made that move, however, we lost about half of our congregation of the mission group. Some of them didn't want to go, and we laugh about this so many times. It had no inside plumbing, had no water in the building at all. When we had feet washing, we'd bring water in gallon jugs. That's when we have feet washing at the church there. And we put a roof on it, old roll roofing. We put that on there and had put rock on the drive and made some investment there. But since we dressed it up like we did, there were at least 2 other church groups that used that building after we made our move. They followed there. And so we hope that was fruitful also. While we were in the old community house, we'd raised $20,000 and we're planning to buy some land. And I'd looked at some plots of land and really had, my hope was set on locating out here on outer Lincoln between Highway 261 and Evansville, down on top of a big hill. And every time the doors closed on other properties even that I looked at, while we were there just praying. But there was a man who knew of me. He don't really knew me, but he knew of me. He was a part of the Faith Temple Baptist Church in Chandler. And he and I engaged in conversation. And that church's pastor had died some months before that. And the group there were floundering. In fact, they'd become divided. Many of them had already just gone. Had a heavy indebtedness on their properties. And he said something to the effect that day that boy, I told him we were looking for property. He said, we ought to come together, About that same time, very near the same time, June Scales, who's a wife of our deacon Bob, had an Avon route, and she called on Linda Alvis, who's our other deacon's wife, and they were just visiting that day, and they got engaged in some similar conversation about their struggle, and they didn't know what they're going to do with their indebtedness, foreclosure, and all that. Those 2 totally separate conversations with people didn't know. We didn't know I didn't know June Scales and Bob, but anyway, we talked a little further, and then we planned to have a joint service, I think the last Sunday in December, over there, and I was to preach. But now today in our church, Linda Spencer and Bob and June Scales are 2 of those folks who were part of that group, and very, very dear friends and who love the Lord. We changed the name. Here we were called New Life Free Will Baptist Church. That was the first name. But in order to kind of still hold on to something precious there, we called it the Faith Free Will Baptist Church. See, we actually organized the church in November '82. I don't know if the men remember or not, but I was ready to go ahead and organize in early, about the 1st of '82. We assumed the big indebtedness on the parsonage, and I always remember that some of those fellows, they think about the big indebtedness we had, and they were not comfortable. And I felt like the right thing for me to do was not put them under a strain, so we put it off, but God continued to bless, and then we're all together in it when we did it. The Lord is faithful.